Hey, what's going on, kids? No, I'm joking. This is Kadeem from FreshmanScreenplay.com, and I am going to go over four rules when naming a character in a screenplay. Sorry, four rules for naming a character in a screenplay. Now, this has been a very controversial, not super controversial, but topic that people have been confused on. I would say. There's been a lot of Quora questions and answers and Yahoo questions and answers and things like that. So what I did is I took the screenplay books I've had, I took some of my knowledge and some knowledge from popular screenwriter writers like Quentin Tarantino and um, some other good ones we're gonna go over. And I've kind of compiled like four rules for naming a character that you should probably follow if you want your character name to be unique, interesting, cool, all the above, right? Okay, so let's hop into them. And the first one is uh, pick names that are right for the story you're telling, right? So let's go over what that means. Right here I have time period names, right? And I give an example of Game of Thrones, right? You can pick names based off the time period you're writing in. The original writer for Game of Thrones, he originally was making a piece that had to do with European history, and before he entered in all these dragons and for lack of a better word, superpowers within this unique piece of art, right? But as you can see, the names Tyrell, Lannister, Bolton, Targaryen, right? These names represent that time period or sound like that time period. They're not necessarily are from that time period, but they sound like it, right? And this is something that should be used, especially if you're writing for a certain time, even if it's like the 80s or the 90s or not necessarily the 1900s or something BC, things like that. Think about for picking names in the 90s. Think about what the parents were in the 70s, right? You got to think about that. It should be it will be a huge benefit for you to actually talk to some people and ask some people like what are the popular names, or you can probably Google them. You know what I mean? So because when you create a character, it's really important for the reader, aka or the producer or executive, to not be thrown out of the story because they're saying, "Hey, I grew up in the '80s or I grew up in the '90s, and there was no one ever named this or something like that." Right? Not saying that this will happen, but you know. So that's really important. Another uh, another type of name we can go over is New World names, right? And I have here the popular example, Avatar. And when it comes to New World names, you want to think about the pronunciation of the name. That is essential to a New World name, right? It's almost how it sounds more affects um, the reader more than what it means, right? New World names are interesting. You can think about things like, let's say, Star Wars. When it comes to things like Luke Skywalker and Yoda, right? Those names are designated to people that live in that universe, right? Um, when it comes to, I would say, New World names, George Lucas, he had like a quote, a really, really good quote that I have right here that you can actually go on freshmanscreenplay.com and read for yourself. But he thought about names um, as it appears phonetically, right? Because he wanted to telegraph a bit of the actual character within the name, right? And he stayed away from names that started with Z or X because those are like typical names that you would normally associate with any galactic or interplanetary type of film or anything like that. Those were the names that were popular, but he wanted to be unique when it came to this. Okay, so that's step one, I would say. Just think about that. If you're writing in a certain time, right? If it's not 2019, 2020, you kind of want to go with something from that time period, right? All right, so step two is the sound of a name. Let's skip to that. Now, this is a really, really interesting tip, too, right? Harder letter names can also make a character sound more aggressive or evil. Like, and I have these examples here, one being Darth Vader, or Damien, or Blair, or Carrie, or Michael. Those names, they have a letter that's within the name that stands out aggressively, right? And this can also be translated to the aggressiveness of a character. And all these names that I've given, they all were in some form or another um, evil within other movies and things like that. For example, Damien um, is obviously associated with the devil's son, right? The devil impregnated a woman, right? And she gave birth to someone and named him Damien, and that's been like kind of like the lore ever since in all these devil movies that came out. Now the opposite of that are names like Ashley, Samantha, Owen, Julian, Caleb. Now these are just examples, but you can hear the difference. Like they kind of roll off the tongue. They're kind of smoother, right? They flow a little bit more, and um, they kind of sound as if the person would be a lot gentler. You know what I mean? So think about the way a name sounds, right? Use these examples. You can pretty much go through any type of movie or popular movie and see those names in there and see how they characterize their names, right? Like the evil characters, if it's black and white like that, and the good characters, like when it comes to what's that movie? Back to the Future, Biff, right? Like you just hear that movie, if you hear that name, it sounds ugly. He was an ugly character. See, that's kind of how you should probably think about it. Okay, number three. Okay, names based on true nature, right? Now, true nature can mean a lot of things, but I have a couple examples here. I talk about the warrior Blade. Like in that movie, Blade, um, the character was named that because he was the warrior. He was not just the protagonist of the movie, but he was the actual person. He was an actual warrior, the one that was defending the humans against the vampires, and they gave him that name because it's self-explanatory, right? Captain Jack Sparrow, or I named this the Fool, right? When you hear of someone named Jack, right? Someone named Jack almost seems like a kind of funny person, right? Captain Jack Sparrow. How that flows off the tongue is almost comical, right? The psychopath or the psycho, Jigsaw. Like if you need someone named Jigsaw, it sounds like someone that's going to cut you up, right? That's what it sounds like. Now here he was actually someone who he'd never cut anybody up. He made them cut themselves up. But you get what I'm saying with that. Their true nature is shine through the type of name that they have. It's a feeling that's given to the audience or the reader, right? And the last one, we're gonna go over the last um, example here, and that is you don't have to name your character. Now that's kind of like contrarian to the three examples I just given, but you really don't. And a good example is Kill Bill, the way Quentin Tarantino named his character, who ended up her actual name is Beatrix Kiddo, right? But they named her the Bride throughout the whole screenplay, and her name was really never said until the very end, when Bill actually said her name. But when he said her name, it was almost like he was kind of sunning her, if you know what that means, or kind of like um, talking to her as if he was her superior, which he was. But naming someone kiddo, like kind of like sounds like he was kind of joking around with her, right? But her last name really is Kiddo, which is actually funny. But throughout the whole movie, he named her the Bride, which is actually um, a combination of Uma Thurman and Quentin Tarantino's idea. I believe he described it as she called her up one night and it was like, I'm the bride, right? Because they were coming up with the idea of Kill Bill together, right? And that kind of stuck. Stuck. It made sense, even if they thought about changing it. It made sense for the story, and he's done this more than once. Like if you look at his previous work, his first directorial debut. I said his first directorial debut. Anyway, his first screenplay that he got to direct, which was Reservoir Dogs. Now, Reservoir Dogs, each character was named the color. Mr. Blue, Mr. Pink, Mr. White, you know what I mean? And the colors could kind of represent the attitude of the person. And it even tells you a little bit more about the character. Like when he named them Mr. Pink, he said, "Why do I got to be named Mr. Pink?" Right? That could give insight to how the character feels about himself, right? So it kind of develops the character as well. And these names, they were very interesting. You know what I mean? And they made a whole scene out of it, which I thought was great. So those were, I guess, the four tips, or really um, the four, I guess, say guidelines for how to name a character in your screenplay. You should take these and whatever name you're thinking of, or if you haven't thought of a name, kind of go through these four, and you end up with something that's right for your screenplay. That will display the character very well. Now, in this post, I have 14 of them, so I don't really have time to go through all 14. I could be here for another 30 minutes, kind of going through that with examples, but there are 14 of them. So you can Google freshmanscreenplay.com, 14 tips to pick a character, and it should come up. Or you can click the link on the bottom in the description. It'll take you right to this page, and you can kind of breeze through them and read some of the examples. They're real quick. Give you some examples of each one. I go through superhero names, uh, kind of like saying a name out loud, why that's important, just different things, right? So check that out for more information. That will help you shape your names even further. So that is it, and I will be coming up to you guys with another video some other time. Alright, this is Kadeem with FreshmanScreenplay.com. Peace.